Good morning. How are you doing today, Benjamin?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. What is it like to put a book like this together? Because there are so many different authors that have different levels of play and stuff, but you really go into this in a way that it's like, oh my God, it's being played out like it's happening right now.
Yeah, it's a challenge. A lot of the book is based, sort of the core of the book is based on these sort of archive files from the old communist spy agency in Czechoslovakia. So sifting through all that stuff was what took an incredibly long amount of time. And then you sort of have to then, even once you do that, you kind of jump to the next step of trying to put that in a way where it's a story that people can read rather than just sort of listing
Right.
quotes from documents. So it was labor intensive, I'll say.
Yeah, because there is flow in there, and I've always wondered because otherwise it just basically becomes a book of reference instead of the actual storyline itself.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I mean, even when you go through the first draft, and my editor kind of goes through it, Clive Priddle, my editor, went through it, and that was something that we went through the first time, and there were sections that do kind of end up like that. You want to convey, you kind of think you have all this interesting information, which you do, but the challenge becomes not making it read like a list of just sort of
Right.
presenting research on a page and making it into a compelling story that people want to read, which is obviously what I want to do too.
Yeah, because it really does. It's got that edge to it where you go, okay, I know I need to get some sleep, but no, I want to go one more chapter. Give me one more chapter.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, that is, yeah, that's sort of, you kind of, when you're structuring it, you kind of want to, end each chapter on sort of, something like a cliffhanger. And I guess, I'm, somebody that, I'm 42. I grew up in the sort of the TV generation and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And especially now when you kind of see these, high quality, sort of multi-episode, show, Mad Men or something like that, you kind of get that same feeling when you're streaming. You're kind of like, oh, it's how late is it? Oh, I can squeeze in one more. And so I guess some in some way that seeps into your head, maybe it's a generational thing. I guess all authors and writers have always kind of they kind of want to pull you forward, but it sort of naturally is a way that I kind of thought about it once I got into it. Almost as each chapter is an episode that could kind of stand on its own, but also you want to kind of pull the reader ahead as fast as you can.
Where were you at when the liar basically hit your heart and it said, look, this is your next project, Benjamin?
Yeah, I was a journalist in Prague,
Really?
and so I kind of it was more sort of this urban myth that I kind of heard about the Koechers, who are the main characters, especially Karel Koecher. And I'd been living there for a couple of years, and sort of I was able to sort of poke around and get an email address for him and kind of reach out to him, and then I started meeting with him, and then kind of as you start to wade into it, it's hard to stop. It's sort of like the story just gets multi-layered and deeper. And then I had the archive files, and it sort of just built momentum on its own. So I'd say pretty early on, I had been a journalist long enough to sort of recognize a good story. And then it was sort of like, okay, can I do this justice? How would I execute this? And so, pretty early on, I was all in, and it was a lot of the challenge was doing it justice really, and trying to structure it in a way that was compelling and also accurate, and a lot of stuff around the Cold War, as I was doing sort of my own research of secondary sources and other books and things like that comes with sort of a political slant. And I really was focused on, all right, I want to tell a story about people.
Yeah.
It's obviously in this setting of history and politics and global events. But the stories that I'm interested in are about, real people. And, most books that I read about this era, at least to me, didn't have that sort of, nuance and detail of sort of, putting you in a real person's shoes. And so that was really where I tried to drill down. And yeah, that's kind of where I started.
Well, you're bringing reality back to where we are right now, because I mean, there's a lot of people that you mentioned Cold War, they go, the what? Yeah, the Cold War. What do you mean? And so it's books like The Liar that say this really did take place, and this really did take place with the CIA, the KGB. This isn't a movie here.
Yeah, I think that's in terms of presentation, I'm trying to write things out in a way that would be like a spy thriller type of novel
Nice.
as a presentation. But the content is nonfiction. It's true. The things I'm quoting are from historical documents. The people that are talking said those words. And so, yeah, I think that is, and I guess the thing that really, if maybe to expand even further on your previous question, that really, drew me in further and further was how detailed some of this stuff I was able to come across was.
Really?
And so you're saying, this really happened. It's like I found documents where I'm in a restaurant and I, at this address, and I know what people are wearing. You know what I mean? Like what color tie somebody has on, and because of the details of the documents. And so that sort of stuff, and being able to talk about that sort of stuff in a real way, it almost brings texture to this thing that, as you say, is kind of mythical, right? You sort of say Cold War. It's like this big, capital C, capital W, and people, it feels like a movie, but it's like, no, here's a guy wearing a polyester tie at this cafe at the Columbus Circle in New York City, and this is what they said, and it's really what they said.
How did you get into those archives? And the reason why I bring it up like that, because, I mean, we're living in an age right now with the thing that happened at Mar-a-Lago and stuff like that, where it's like, wow, I mean, here's all these archives of history that, it's like, how did you get in there when our own history people are saying, don't let anybody in on this stuff?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the countries that were, a lot of the Central and Eastern European countries, after the fall of communism, kind of had this, something like a truth and reconciliation process where they opened up a lot of these documents and made them public. I mean, it's really famous. East Germany was I think, sort of the most famous one, but Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic and Slovakia, did the same. So you could actually go in, if you were a citizen of these places, and see if someone had been spying on you. And this also had the effect of, if you were spying on your neighbors, they found out about it at that point. Yeah. And so a lot of this stuff was just made public, but it is an incredible, incredible amount of material. So I was dealing with a very few, I had specifically people I was trying to find their files, but it was 30, I think I went through 30,000 pages. I mean, it's insane. And so they have these sort of, public, something like the National Archives that in the States, but sort of this public institution that houses these things. And there's kind of researchers and scholars sort of, producing reports on the most important elements or whatever. But basically, if you have some idea of what you're looking for, or a specific person that you're looking for, a lot of this historical stuff is actually public record. Now, there's a few things that get redacted, and actually some of the things that were redacted from Karel's file were redacted at the request of the U.S. government, ironically, because he was sort of in this middle ground of also working for the CIA. So, but I guess in that sense, they kind of had this sort of, they just opened the doors and let everyone in. That was sort of the which caused a big mess, but also they viewed that, post 1989 and in the 1990s, that this was the fastest and best way to sort of, overcome this sort of, the ghosts of the past, if you will.
There had to be trust on both sides. You had to trust Koecher, and he had to trust you. How long did it take for that trust to come into development?
Hard to say. So you're right. I think in one sense, I was fortunate in that he's a pretty confident guy, and he kind of has this belief that he's going to be able to sort of spin me in this case, right? So he was pretty quickly willing to talk, and and then I think as we got to know each other, he kind of respected me, at least, that I was asking good questions, and I kind of had a good memory of what we talked about last time, this sort of stuff. And so it's sort of a slow process. Yeah, you're right. You kind of build just by meeting each other. Now, at the same time, you kind of got to be, you have to maintain skepticism. This is a guy who's got a history of doing, of not, the book is called The Liar, of not telling the truth, right? And, so always, listening, trying to put yourself in his position, but also sort of not falling for everything hook, line, and sinker, if you will. And I would also just add, I talked to a lot of other people for the book, and ex-spies, ex-FBI people that were interested in arresting spies. It wasn't just Karel that you had to be skeptical of, giving it to you straight, or telling you the truth, right? A lot of these people were older. They tend to remember things differently 30 or 40 years later. They tend to, play up their
Yeah.
own role in events a little bit. So it was really an exercise in always sort of triangulating, between what someone was telling you, maybe what you had in a document, maybe what somebody else had, and trying to make sense of that make sense of what what they're telling you with what to absolutely be true, and trying to put the pieces together a bit like a puzzle.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point about how they've changed stories and things like that, because I truly believe that if you live in your past, you're going to rewrite the past so that you can become comfortable with the past. Did you have one of those moments where they would say something and you go, I don't know, man, I got some documentation right here that says you did other things?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, I would say. And I guess that maybe the harder part is to judge whether the person is trying to mislead you on purpose, or whether it's simply, a 75-year-old person who's remembering something that they did when they were 45 and remembers it with some rose-tinted glasses. I mean, I guess a little bit, I use this example of, what if I'm telling some story about my old high school football career or something like that? I may not be lying, but I bet my story, I'm a little bit faster than I was, So that sort of thing, it's that sort of mix, and that's, and both things happen. You kind of have people say things that you're like, I know that not to be true, and then you kind of have situations where people sort of, it seems a little tilted a little bit one direction or another, and so yeah, that's the challenge. Obviously, that's the challenge, and trying to be as close to the truth as you can in a nonfiction book. I mean, there are plenty of times where it'd be a hell of a lot easier just to make up some bit of the narrative that puts it all together in a simple way. Unfortunately, you can't do that, unfortunately. So
Hollywood always likes to make the double agent. They almost try to make it like a sexy story and stuff like that. But what I love about your story is that the fact that I sat there and I said, this is real. But what happens is I've got to be able to learn from this as well, because I'll bet you there are people that are sitting there with yellow highlighters going, really? I'm gonna mark this out. I'm gonna put this in here. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna learn from this.
Yeah, I think that the story's the story, and on its own, on that top level, it's sort of hopefully a compelling, sort of exciting read. When you're putting a book together, though, when someone gives you the opportunity to put a book together, you kind of think about what your book, what you want your book to be. So sort of on a secondary level, it was important to me to have this sort of, historical context, and in particular for me, I had spent a lot of time living in Prague, and I had, just sort of through being there, and I worked as a journalist there for years, I'm American, but I learned a lot about the Cold War and the history of sort of the countries, not the Soviet Union, not Russia, right? Czechoslovakia or Poland or things like that. And there's a lot of nuance and detail that we tend to gloss over. And so putting sort of little pieces, little tidbits like that in there, where relevant, where they kind of aid the story or provide context, was something that was really important to me. And I kind of felt, my wife is, for example, was born in communist Czechoslovakia. She's Slovak. So you kind of have this, I don't want to say I had a foot in both worlds, but a little bit do. You kind of have this, it's not loyalty, but yeah, loyalty to sort of presenting, the reality of another country or other people's experience correctly or in detail. And to me, as a person who reads books and used to read spy stories or history books or stuff like that, that's not what I get from every book that I read, and so I was really conscious about trying to do that. Plus, my wife would I'd be sleeping on the couch or something like that if I did.
So when you take on a story like this, where you're actually doing the history of a double agent, did somebody follow you? Did you ever have that feeling that, because it's like, here comes this guy, he's looking for information, he's talking to these other spies. What's this guy up to?
I think, no, not quite to that extreme, because a lot of the people on most of this stuff happened a while ago, and so, but on a less intimidating level. Somebody kind of gets wind, some ex CIA person who was involved in, peripherally involved in this, or, I won't say his name, but I had a gentleman just a few weeks ago. He was the son of a CIA agent who had died under basically mysterious circumstances in the 80s. And, he was trying to piece together his father's own sort of story because there were some holes in it. And Karel and his father wasn't for sure, but had somehow, perhaps crossed paths. So you do kind of have these people that come, and that this was not a threatening conversation at all. This was a guy who was just genuinely curious to see, to learn what he could. So you kind of have these people that sort of, get wind of it and come out, I don't want to say come out of the woodwork, but come out of somewhere and contact you. And so that's, and that for the most part, that's good. I guess I've had a couple conversations where I talk to people and sort of these are Americans, I would say, this story, the archives that I went through were not available to the FBI or the CIA in the 80s when Karel was eventually arrested. So in some ways, I know stuff that they didn't, a lot of stuff that they didn't. And so in the course of interviews, you encounter these people and they're sort of telling you you're wrong when you're not, So there's not any terms of like physical threats or intimidation in terms of like someone following me as I walk down the street and me being paranoid about that, but more, you have these encounters where people are sort of both good and bad trying to find out how much you know, if that makes sense.
Did you record any of this, get it on film, or did you get it on, because I mean, this book has got to go beyond just being, a group of pages and things like that. I mean, there's got to be a documentary somewhere in this, or either that, or someone's going to pick it up and make it into a movie.
I mean, I think it's well suited for that. Certainly, I think I have audio recordings of all my interviews with Karel and some other ones. I don't have video recordings. So I think it does certainly. Certainly, it's my hope that there's this thing has more legs, and I think I said this when I was sort of presenting. When you're trying to convince a publisher to let you write a book, you have to explain to them why they should let you write this book and why you're the person, kind of to write this book. And for me, I always found, I actually find some of the book, when I'm learning about sort of some big event or big historical event, I often find a story that's about maybe a more minor character to be more illuminating. So when I'm going through talking to a publisher and I'm saying, is Karel the most important spy in the history of the Cold War? He's not, right? But his story and some of the stuff that happens might tell you as much about the Cold War as anyone else, right? That's kind of it's a real person. We have details that other people don't have. And actually, what he's engaged in is more typical of spying than sort of, whoever your all-time hero spy is, right? That's sort of they're a hero because they're unusual. And so in the day-to-day basis, these sort of things are, this is a more accurate or more precise story about those times. And so, my hope is that translates a number of ways. When the base of the narrative and the story is good enough, and then there's enough color and detail and things like that, and the characters are real and hopefully you feel like you can touch them, or if you read the whole book, you kind of get some insight into them as people. I'm hopeful that there's other ways that this sort of story can reach more people.
Man, Benjamin, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
I appreciate it, Errol. Thanks a lot for having me. I really enjoyed the talk, and hope to catch you some other time.
Absolutely. Will you be brilliant today? Okay, sir.
All right. You have a good day too. Bye-bye.